Welcome everybody. We're going to give this a little bit longer to try to let everybody in, and then we'll get started. All right, I guess let's get going. So welcome everybody. I hope everybody's been having a fulfilling and engaging Earth Week. Welcome to the second installment of the Natural Resources Agency Science Exchange. My name is Mark Gold, and I'm the Deputy Secretary for Ocean and Coastal Policy, as well as the Executive Director of the Ocean Protection Council. And if you don't know the Ocean Protection Council, next slide. We are a body that is chaired by Secretary Wade Crowfoot, and the Vice Chair is Secretary Jared Blumenfeld. Other members include the Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis, public members Michael Brown and Jordan Diamond, as well as ex officio members, Assembly Member Mark Stone and Senator Ben Allen. Our staff, we're pretty small size staff. We're about a dozen or so. Deputy Director Jen Eckerly, and most people on staff are marine scientists. What we do is we recommend ocean policy for the state. We fund research in a wide variety of different areas on ocean and coastal issues. Also projects, building projects, everything from wetland restoration to the like, as well as being involved in community engagement. A lot of that is surrounding marine protected areas in particular. Next slide. So our mission, as you can see right here, is to do some of the things that I was just talking about. And next slide. We put together about a year ago a strategic plan to protect California's coast and ocean. And there were four main goals or pillars within this plan. One was to safeguard coastal and marine ecosystems and communities in the face of climate change. The second goal is to advance equity across ocean and coastal policies and actions. Then to enhance coastal and marine biodiversity. And then the fourth goal is to support ocean health through a sustainable blue economy. And what's different about this plan a little bit is that each pillar has some specific targets and objectives and actions. So we really tried to create a culture of accountability, not just for the OPC, but for the state on really moving forward on really doing a better job protecting our coast and ocean. Obviously, California's coast is so much of our identity and who we are as Californians. And really this plan goes a long way towards really protecting that identity, really enhancing it, and making sure that we have access for all on California's coast. So let's move on to why we're here today, to really hear from two of our scientists here at the Ocean Protection Council. And so the first speaker is going to be Justine Kimball. And she works, basically she leads our climate change program at the Ocean Protection Council, and she focuses on sea level rise adaptation, coastal resiliency, ocean acidification, offshore wind, and our efforts concerning the impacts of climate change on the ocean. Before she came to the Ocean Protection Council, Justine spent 5 years in DC. She was at NOAA's Coral Program, and she was also a Knaus Fellow at the Office of the Oceanographer of the Navy. She got her PhD from Stanford, studying deep sea corals in the Pacific Ocean, and her bachelor's was from Santa Barbara. For fun, enjoys farmer's market, baking, seems to make a lot of jam and the like, and all things oceans and wilderness. Justine?
Great. Thanks, Mark. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to share some of our climate change priorities and the work that we're doing. As you just shared, our first goal of the strategic plan is around safeguarding our coast and ecosystems and communities in the face of climate change. This is a really overarching goal because it affects all program areas, and unfortunately is expected to only become a bigger issue in the years ahead and have bigger impacts. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the areas that we are focused on right now in the realm of climate change. Next slide. Great. So ocean acidification and deoxygenation both relate to changing ocean chemistry due to climate change. This is beyond the natural variability that you would expect in the environment. Scientists are seeing a clear trend of more acidified waters and less dissolved oxygen. The ocean has absorbed over a quarter of the carbon dioxide that's been emitted by humans into the atmosphere. And as the ocean absorbs this excess CO2, as you see here, the dissolved carbon dioxide, it becomes more acidic and the pH of the ocean decreases, as you can see in the figure. Some people might be familiar with pH through the food that they eat, like lemon juice, for instance, has a lower pH, and our taste receptors can actually react to that, and it tastes sour. And so just like our taste buds are sensitive to pH, so are different animals and critters living in the ocean. So for instance, some of the most vulnerable are those that secrete a shell, because those shells, as they're building themselves in the ocean environment, they're pulling those chemical building blocks from the surrounding seawater, and ocean acidification actually makes that harder to do. And then the California coast is particularly vulnerable to acidification and deoxygenation due to natural processes such as upwelling. You can see in this really pretty image there of the oceanography, the circulation, and showing the temperature. You can see those cold temperatures right near the coast. That's a natural process that brings colder, deeper water to the surface near the coast, upwelling. And so those natural processes layered on top of global climate change, layered on top of local pollution sources. You can see here a wastewater treatment plant outfall that's discharging additional nutrients into the environment. Those are all stressors on marine life. So one project that we've funded actually models that physical, the chemical, the biological processes, and disentangles those stressors. And you can actually look at the scope and the scale of, for instance, those local pollution sources on ocean acidification and deoxygenation. And then in addition to modeling, there's monitoring, there's research that we're really involved in to understand that biological sensitivity and how ocean organisms and ecosystems are going to be impacted by these stressors going forward. Next slide. And so if that's not unsettling enough, there is sea level rise. And again, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, like ocean acidification. It's just a matter, same as ocean acidification, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's really a matter of, how much and by when. So currently in California, depending on your location, sea level could be up to 6 inches higher than it was in 1950. And you can see some tide gauge data here that clearly shows a continued upward trend of sea level. And this is happening across California. And the rate of that is increasing. So by 2100, we will likely see at least a foot of sea level rise, but it could be greater than 10 feet, depending on different projections and futures and where you're at. And so obviously that's a big range. 1 foot to 10 feet. And that's why it's really important to be continually updating the science and the projections so that you're not under or over preparing. But precautionary planning is necessary now, and projects are happening now. And all of that should be preparing us for those likely futures that planning and projects now will make our coast more resilient for those futures and let us retain all those aspects of the coast and ocean that we love. Next slide. And nature-based solutions can play an important role in that. Habitats such as wetlands and dunes and oyster reefs, in addition to their intrinsic value as for biodiversity and for habitats, they can also provide a really great defense against sea level rise and store carbon. So we have some really specific goals in our strategic plan related to protecting and restoring and adapting these habitats to sea level rise. The picture here is actually a state coastal conservancy pilot project to add sediment to an existing marsh. For wetlands that are at sea level rise like this, there's really sea level like this, there's two main options. You can either build the marsh up to a higher elevation to persist with sea level rise, or you can allow there to be sort of inland areas that they can migrate up to as the seas rise. So strategies like this that allow a marsh to persist in place are going to be really important because California is really built up near the coast. There's not always that opportunity to allow these habitats to move inland. And so with that, I will pass it over to Mark to introduce Mike.
Thanks, Justine. Whoops. Obviously, the climate issues, and we'll get more into it when we get into the Q&A, but the climate issues are pretty scary stuff when you think about California moving forward. So we'll dive into that more. So thanks for that overview. Next up is Mike Escrow, and he's the Ocean Protection Council's Marine Ecosystems Program Manager, as well as our tribal liaison. He works to connect science and policy and people for effective ecosystem-based management in California. He works a lot on marine protected area monitoring and evaluation, kelp forest ecosystem resilience, sustainable aquaculture, biodiversity conservation, and tribal engagement. His background is in marine ecology and the application of basic science to policy questions, which is really why we're here today. And before that, he was a Bruin, so definitely true to my heart. Got his bachelor's there and a master's in applied marine science from Cal State Monterey Bay, where he focused on MPA monitoring and the role of de facto marine reserves and ocean conservation. When not at work, it seems like Mike is in the ocean most of the time, scuba diving or kayaking. He also does cycling, backpacking, but really it seems like his favorite thing is hating on sea otters. Anyways, Mike, you're up.
Oh, you had to get me in trouble with the sea otters, Mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining and happy Earth Week. Yeah, I'm excited to follow up on Justine's presentation on climate and discuss some of my work on the biodiversity side of things, and really how two guiding principles, which are science and inclusion, inform pretty much everything that we do on biodiversity here at OPC. So next slide, please, James. So just for some context, California's coastal and marine ecosystems, as we all know, are incredibly biodiverse, and they provide important benefits to tens of millions of Californians, but they're also highly vulnerable to climate change, as Justine mentioned, ocean acidification, sea level rise, also other threats, pollution, water quality issues. So at OPC, we're working to conserve biodiversity in the face of those threats to both meet people's needs and also really honor nature's right to thrive. That's sort of the focus of Goal 3. That balance is the focus of Goal 3 of our strategic plan. And so today I'm going to provide a pretty quick high-level overview of some of the top priorities in my portfolio on biodiversity under that Goal 3. It's going to be a pretty whirlwind tour, but we'll have a chance for more robust discussion, I think, during the Q&A portion. So next slide. We'll start with 30 by 30. In October of last year, Governor Newsom committed to the 30 by 30 global target, and this is really going to be a major step forward for biodiversity conservation in coastal and ocean ecosystems. But at the same time, we're really in uncharted waters, so to speak, as the first state in the nation to make this commitment. So we're tackling some really fundamental questions about how do we even go about doing this? So first of all, how do we define conservation? How much of California's waters are already conserved or protected in some way? And finally, California is a really rich mosaic of tribal communities, stakeholder communities. How do we balance that spirit of conservation with maintaining access for all and maintaining sustainable use of these ecosystems. So as we move forward, this process is going to be guided by two things. First of all, by science, and second of all, by being an inclusive process with everyone really coming to the table together to figure out how we do this. So some of you may have attended our regional workshops on 30 by 30 earlier this week. We got into some coastal issues at the San Francisco Bay workshop on Wednesday, and I think that's a really great start for this inclusive bottom-up kind of grassroots process on 30 by 30. So next slide, please. As Mark mentioned, I'm a pretty avid scuba diver, so this next priority is really personal for me, protecting and restoring our kelp forests. Over the last few years, we've seen changing ocean conditions, including warmer waters, the loss of the sunflower star, result in a 95% loss of bull kelp up on our north coast. And giant kelp forests on the central coast and south coast may also be similarly vulnerable. So OPC has worked really closely with our colleagues over at the Department of Fish and Wildlife to address this issue by implementing critical pilot projects that are really getting a good idea of some of the baseline scientific questions, and also doing science-based testing of potential kelp restoration approaches to deal with the loss. And I'm especially proud that just in February of this year, we released an interim kelp action plan, which discusses how the state's going to be learning from those pilot projects and what our key next steps are on kelp. Next slide. Another thing that I spend a lot of time on is the monitoring and evaluation of our statewide marine protected area network. So believe it or not, we are 10 years down the road from MPA implementation, and next year, the state will conduct the first 10-year management review of the MPA network, which is really focused on how are our MPAs doing? Are they meeting their goals? And so there's going to be a couple of major input streams on that evaluation. First of all, almost 10 years worth of monitoring data and analyses, including, importantly, citizen and community science efforts. Here you can see our Deputy Director, Jen Eckerly, participating in a volunteer hook and line monitoring program out at Año Nuevo a couple of years ago. And also stakeholder input. We're going to be embarking in the coming months on really comprehensive process to learn what indicators of MPA success are important to you, important to different stakeholder communities. And all of that with the goal of informing the adaptive management of our MPA network moving forward. And next slide, please. So finally, I want to highlight, as Mark mentioned, I'm honored to serve as OPC's tribal liaison. You know, California's tribes have been here forever, and they're the original stewards of our coast and ocean. So at OPC, we really value that partnership, and we're honored to be earning the trust of tribes as we strive constantly for more meaningful and effective engagement on ocean and coastal issues. And maybe during the discussion, we can talk about some specific examples of that. But you know, I really do want to flag here that this is all with the goal of moving toward true co-management with tribes of our ocean and coastal resources. So I think I'll stop there. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks, Mike, for that overview. So everyone, this is where we, very informal. We start some Q&A to give you the opportunity to get to know Mike and Justine a little bit better. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we can try to pull from that. I've got quite a few that I'm going to get into for a while, and then we'll sort of fold in the questions that you may have along the way. So if Mike and Justine are ready, let's just start getting into it. I'll start with a basic question for you both. And Justine, why don't you start, and Mike, you follow up, which is what first got you interested in becoming a marine scientist to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, it seems really simple, but I guess it's a little hard because I can't really point to any one particular thing. I grew up near the coast, small town, Half Moon Bay. And so I've always just been near the coast and ocean, sort of rural growing up, and really always loved nature and the environment. And so when I went to college, oceanography was the first course I signed up for. And I got to go on some cool field trips, and had some really great professors and grad students. And I've always wanted to scuba dive, but you need your parental like approval before when you're under 18, and my parents wouldn't give me that. So that was like the first thing I did when I went to undergrad is I signed up for a scuba diving course there and started research scuba diving for a lab. And it was like, wow, someone's going to pay me to scuba dive when I didn't even, when I want to do this for fun. So I feel like it's just always been a natural progression for me and not ever just like one big turning point. It's just always been one step forward. And I couldn't be happier where it's ended up, because I get to combine all of these things that I like personally in a career and focus that. So yeah, that's my sort of long winding answer.
Thanks, Justine. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty similar to Justine. I grew up, the beaches of Malibu were my playground as a kid, swimming, learning to surf, boogie boarding, poking around in the tide pools. So I guess I was just always fascinated by the ocean. I think if I could maybe pinpoint one sort of formative experience, my family took a trip when I was, I guess, about 12 to the Big Island of Hawaii. And that was my first time snorkeling and just sort of seeing what was going on under the water, and especially the sea turtles. I can remember just the sea turtles blew my mind, man. I mean, getting the chance to get up close and personal with those guys. From then on, I was pretty much hooked. So I've chosen some colder study systems subsequently, but really I'd say that's probably the one experience I'd.
And Mike, did you have a mentor or role model sort of at the beginning of your marine scientist journey, or anyone come to mind?
I think the dive safety officer at CSU Monterey Bay, Frank Degnan, I guarantee you he's not watching right now because he's probably out diving, but he's not an academic scientist, but he's a really keen ocean observer. I mean, 30 or 40 years of diving in the Monterey area. So not only did he teach me everything I know about scuba, and also how to kind of keep my cool in stressful situations, which come in handy even in non-scuba situations sometimes, but really, taught me a lot about asking questions, observing what's going on in the water, formulating theories and things like that.
And what about you, Justine? Did you have a sort of a scientific mentor or role model that, really had an impact on you?
Not like one by name. I feel like I couldn't single one out. I've had so many. I mean, I think you talk to anyone in this field and you couldn't make it through with having mentors. I feel like undergrad is really key to have a few really enthusiastic mentors, like especially out in the field. I had one undergraduate advisor who invited me on like an NSF a research experience for undergrad that went out to the Galapagos, and we discovered new hydrothermal vents there. And then, I had a really great PhD advisor and got to do some really cool things in grad school. So I think it's impossible for me to pinpoint one. And I still work with them all, so I feel like it'd be a little awkward, but I've had some really good mentors.
That's good to hear. My mentor story is a little different. Few people probably know it, but mine was a non-scientist, a woman named Dorothy Green, who was an incredible environmental advocate in LA area, first president of the environmental group Heal the Bay, and just unbelievable energy, and never took no for an answer in really trying to push for greater marine conservation and reduction of pollution of Santa Monica Bay. And so for me, that's why I always asked the mentorship program, because it was just because it's just so important to me. Now, one of the things that's so, different about the Ocean Protection Council is that, we work with the scientific community all the time. We also work with our sister agencies like California Department of Fish and Wildlife, obviously on marine protected areas, probably 15 to 20 different agencies on climate sorts of issues. So a lot of partnerships and collaboration. Otherwise, the OPC couldn't get their work done at all. Why don't you just give us a little bit of a background, Justine, on how do you think your academic background? I mean, you obviously came from Stanford, one of the top universities in the country. very, basic research oriented. How do you think all of that really help you succeed in your position currently at the OPC?
Well, yeah, I think it depends if, we're working, yeah, as you said, we work with different groups of people on this job. But the scientific community, I think it really helps to have that research background, to have that experience of doing research, of pursuing, academic questions, of collecting data, of analyzing data, of interpreting data. I feel like scientists are a funny bunch. And so when you're working with them, they speak their own language, and they love it when you speak the same language. So when you can commiserate about an instrument being down for 2 months or whatever it might be, I feel like it just builds that partnership really naturally. And I think they can see, like, us having research science backgrounds, how excited we get about their work and about their results. And so it's just such a natural partnership that we can have. And then I feel the same sort of, I feel like I really do sort of in between two worlds, because I didn't want to stay in the scientific community and the academic community, because I wanted to be more applied, and I wanted to see how that information could change things, could change management, policy, decision making, could result in protection and conservation of the areas that I care about. And so that's where I sit now. And so I can, when I work with our state colleagues and federal colleagues and local representatives, like I can totally relate to them on that level too, of wanting to shape regulations, management, land use, whatever it might be that's in their purview. I can relate to them there too. So I can think like, well, what are they trying to do? What is their goal for their position? And how can I help support them with better information, so that across the board, everyone we're working with is making decisions that are informed by science. And so it's a really cool place that we're in at OPC. And I feel like somehow my background is really well suited for that dynamic.
Great, thanks, Justine. And what about you, Mike? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo everything that Justine said. I think, my research background above all really gave me a, familiarity with the scientific method and a scientific vocabulary. So being at this interface now, I can sort of understand, like, okay, if here's the broad policy or management questions that we need answers to, here's how science could help get us there, or here's an experiment that you could design to sort of get at that question. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then also, yeah, echoing what Justine said on partnerships. I mean, I said we a lot during my presentation, and that's not just we at OPC. I mean, that's on MPAs and Kelp, for example. It's like a incredibly close partnership with the department. Sustainable aquaculture, there's partnerships with many other agencies. So yeah, the importance of partnerships on getting biodiversity work done, I think, just can't be overstated.
Yeah, we very well put by both of you, and we play this role sort of translation, of highly technical scientific information to the public, as well as to legislative staffers and legislators, and that's interesting in its own right. One of the things that I personally have enjoyed a lot, and I know you both have spent a hell of a lot of time on, is really trying to get academics to understand better the ramifications of their research from a policy perspective, and really more solution oriented. I mean, myself as a product of the UC system, being a triple Bruin, basic research is the rule of the day, and applied research was always sort of looked down upon. I'm very happy to say I think that's changed a lot, and I think the work that we're doing at OPC is really part of that change, which I think is pretty exciting. One of the questions we're getting from the audience, which is related to one that I asked, but of all the marine pollution problems, climate problems, biodiversity concerns, what's the one issue that keeps you awake at night, of all the things that you have to deal with? Mike, you want to start on that? I'm guessing it's kelp.
well, I feel like I was going to say, I think I might steal Justine's thunder, because I think I'm going to say climate. I mean, because kelp, intertidal habitat loss, things like those sort of one level down things that keep me up at night are all part of a climate problem, I mean, so if we don't, we can do as much as we possibly can on kelp restoration, but if we don't fix our emissions, you know what I mean? If we don't bring emissions down, if we don't start to fix the underlying drivers of what creates marine heat waves in the first place, then we're totally screwed, no matter how much effort we've put into restoration or research or whatever else it might be. So, above, maybe Justine can kind of elaborate, but I think that's what keeps me up at night the most.
Well, maybe you can flip, and Justine's biggest concern will be kelp. What's the thing that keeps you awake up at night, Justine?
I love kelp forests, don't get me wrong. And I am very concerned about kelp. But my previous job when I was in DC was working on coral reefs, and that's just, it's a very hard field to be in, because I feel like everything that we're concerned about for climate change, coral reefs are at the forefront of those impacts, and we're going to see, just really big, terrible impacts to coral reefs sooner than a lot of other ecosystems. And I was a research scuba diver in Santa Barbara, so I feel like I, have some credibility on cold water diving. But now I'm a warm water diver, and I love to dive in coral reefs. And I get really concerned that in my lifetime, there'll be places that, don't exist any longer. So I actually look at, lists of locations and think like, well, from a vulnerability perspective, which one should I try to think about getting to first? It's very scary, and it definitely keeps me up at night, because there's such amazing ecosystems. They're so gorgeous. They're so incredibly important for so many different reasons. So yeah, coral reefs.
Yeah, I can see why. A couple of years ago, two most depressing talks I think I've seen in the last decade were from two Australian marine biologists who came out to UCLA and sort of talked about the latest monitoring on the Great Barrier Reef. And then, around that time, Chasing Coral came out as a film, which I thought was a very well done film, which sort of brings me to another question. So it's not just the science side. What is your favorite ocean film that you've ever seen, this ocean themed film? Anything come to mind for either one of you?
Well, mine's not really a film. I had a long period of obsession with the Sea Hunt series, Mike Nelson and all of his adventures, some pretty crazy adventures he got himself into. I went through a long phase I have all of the seasons on DVD, and I went through a long phase in grad school of watching those, and they're still really good, actually. So yeah, sort of on a series that's just a total classic.
You're gonna bust up. One of the weird things about Heal the Bay is it's just sort of the nature of anyone who does environmental work. In LA, you can't ignore the entertainment industry. And
was Lloyd Bridges on your board?
He wasn't on the board, but he was a very early supporter, and we gave him one of our first awards.
Very cool.
So it was a lot of fun getting to know him a little bit, and obviously his sons, who've really remained very active in the environmental field as well. What about you, Mike?
That's
Seaspiracy?
awesome.
Is Seaspiracy number one for you, or?
Well, first off, I love Sea Hunt. My dad got me into Sea Hunt. I think he was doing his scuba training right around that time with the old double hose regulators. So we used to watch those. Pretty awesome. But I guess, so favorite movie, I know it's cheesy, but having done all my grad work on deep water systems with ROVs, I gotta say The Abyss. I love The Abyss.
I came this close to saying The Abyss. I love The Abyss.
You mentioned Seaspiracy, Mark. I think that has to be my least favorite ocean movie of all time ever. And there's lots of reasons as to why. I think a lot of people have written about it more eloquently than I could say. But my main problem with that movie is they just completely misstated the science and came to a totally false conclusion that there's no such thing as sustainable seafood. I mean, to me, that was just, it was completely unfair. And quite frankly, I found it offensive to the commercial fishermen who are out there risking their lives every day and care about sustainability and many, in many respects, just as much as the enviro communities. So I really, I just felt that was a completely unfair attack.
And Jaws was very unfair on sharks. I'll just throw that out there. Those sharks are never going to get away from that negative press.
Yeah, but that was a really well done film. But what I find fascinating about Seaspiracy, and I'm sure you've experienced some of this as well, is, relatives I hadn't talked to about my career are calling saying like, how much of this is true? I can't believe this. What can I do about it? And, even friends who kind of have been involved in conservation and environmental protection have asked similar sorts of questions. So anyone from a marine science perspective could have a field day ripping it apart. But there's something to be said that it is bringing attention to a lot of really important issues, and it's resonating with millions of people. So I think to understand why it resonates with people who don't live and breathe it the way we all do is something that I think is important to try to really understand better, because it really is having an impact on a lot of people who generally wouldn't care that much about the ocean. So besides the depressing side of what keeps you up at night, what issue that you work on or that you follow? I mean, what gives you the most hope on issues that we're working on here in California? Is there anything that really comes to mind for you?
Well, I guess offshore wind is new to me. I mean, it's a pretty new area that I'm now learning a lot about, and just the appetite for innovation, for new solutions, for people really caring, and for policy to get out in front of this. I do think that it makes me hopeful that overall the priorities of our country, of our state, are headed in the right direction. And there's just a lot of really passionate people behind that. And so I think from just a straight perspective of like, there's really good people and really good intentions working on this and looking for solutions, that makes me hopeful. But it's hard when you look at the indicators and you see not a lot of them going in a positive direction. So sometimes those good intentions don't necessarily result in the right directionality in the actual environment. And so we're doing a lot with that. We have this effort internally to be looking at indicators and to be really tracking that direction in condition of our environment. And so I think that's going to really help in communication, because sometimes you hear a lot about things and you think, oh, that's solved and we're going in the right direction. But then you actually look in the environment, and it's like, well, it's better, but we're still not going in the right direction. So that's sort of, hopefully that answer made sense.
Yeah, no, it does. One of the things, before I throw it to you, Mike, just having been in this field for such a long time, is that I can at least say point sources of pollution, what's coming out of sewage treatment plants, refineries, coastal discharges, that's a success story. The Clean Water Act has really been an amazing tool that has led to extraordinary improvement in a lot of ways on water quality along our coast. Doesn't mean we still don't have a lot of major water quality problems. Obviously, Justine, you spent some time talking about ocean acidification. One of the Q&A questions was in regards to plastics, which is seems to be the bane of our existence and my career, I might add. I can't seem to get away from it, and it won't be for a long time. And so there's obviously a lot of these other major issues, and climate ones we're finally taking seriously in a big way for the coast and ocean. What about you, Mike? What gives you the most hope on the sorts of things that you're following and working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I mean, I know, Mark, you always make fun of me for being kind of a glasses half full kind of guy, but
That's good.
I don't think I could do my work if I didn't have hope on a number of these issues. I mean, I mentioned climate is something, they're really sort of the big thing that keeps me up at night. But, just this week, we've seen announcements at both the national and state level on emissions, for example, that give me a lot of hope about starting to move those in the right direction. And in terms of kelp, I mean, the situation couldn't be more dire on the North Coast right now, but I do feel a lot of hope based on the collaborative partnerships that we've been able to build, and the interest from the academic community in being solutions oriented, the interest from the diving and fishing communities, really wanting to come to the table and figure out how we do this. I have hope about 30 by 30 because I really feel like that, finding ways to afford meaningful protections for areas of high biodiversity, both in California, but also around the globe, I think in the marine and coastal environment is going to make a huge difference. So I think there's reasons to be optimistic on all fronts.
Yeah, good to hear. To sort of get into that, obviously, I think the story of some of the things you've been working on kelp as well as the work you've been doing working with staff and a bunch of others on tribes with MPAs. Why don't you weigh in a little bit and give the audience, sort of a taste of sort of what you hope happens through this MPA stewardship program with the tribes, and what would be the ideal outcome for you and for California?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that program because it's something I'm really, really proud of OPC for and the department and our partner tribes for sort of pulling together and launching, I guess, towards the middle of last year. Sort of been delayed because of COVID, but the tribes are really starting to get going in earnest now. And really the goal of that program is it's modeled after similar programs in other areas like British Columbia, Australia, but to build a monitoring program that's by tribes and for tribes in ocean and coastal environments. We're focusing on MPAs for now because MPA monitoring is a huge priority, but the idea is eventually it could include other issues that relate to MPAs or to the ocean and coast more broadly, sustainable fisheries, things like that. And so we're building this program that's rooted in these shared priorities between tribes and the state. So you can imagine species of cultural importance, for example, that are also being targeted for long-term MPA monitoring, and really empowering tribal citizens to get out there in and on the water to make observations and collect data. Also to collect traditional knowledge and figure out how can we share with tribes or tribes share with us, have a two-way dialogue about traditional knowledge that's appropriate and respectful and is not just the state sort of being paternalistic and coming to tribes and asking for things yet again. So I'm really excited about that. It's for tribes for now. My ideal outcome, I think, is that, that this really helps to elevate tribal priorities in all the work that we're doing here at the state, that we get more tribes involved. For now, it's 3 North Coast and 1 Central Coast, but I'd love to see more tribes. I'd love to see Southern California represented. And I'd love to see this thing become a sustainable, hallmark of California's ocean and coastal management with this thing going kind of, in perpetuity. So really, really excited about that. And like I said in my presentation, grateful for the partnership and trust of tribes on that.
Yeah, I know how important co-management is to you, and I know that's something that you and others at OPC, and especially Fish and Wildlife, has really been wrestling with quite a bit. And I think it's really exciting under this administration. This is obviously the most sensitive administration, at least in my lifetime, dealing with tribal issues. It's such a high priority. I think there really is hope for some sort of co-management outcome for some MPAs in the future, and it's exciting to be part of that. One of the questions was plastic pollution. I know neither one of you is blessed to have to work on that one. As someone who does work an awful lot on that issue, the OPC Hollywire is our lead on this issue. And for those of you who haven't seen, there's sort of a top 10 priorities that the Ocean Protection Council approved at our last meeting. You might want to take a look at that. So we're really trying to push the envelope at the local, state, and as well as the global level on that regard, and California's involvement. Also, we've been funding a great deal of microplastics research from Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, San Francisco Estuary Institute. Really compelling and scary stuff that's being found on microplastics. Clearly incredibly ubiquitous. Ocean Science Trust in the next week or so will issue a risk assessment framework that they put together with some of the leading scientists on microplastics really in North America to put something together. And so you might want to take a look at that. A lot needs to be done on the action side. I think we've all seen really one of the unintended consequences of the COVID crisis is that we're seeing more and more single-use plastics that are used. The fact that, you know, a lot of us are ordering more food to our house and the like, and, you know, it's not even optional whether or not, you know, utensils or other disposables are coming with the food you're ordering. And that's just ridiculous. That just shouldn't be happening. So hopefully that's going to change soon. We're seeing a lot of change at the local government level. I think City of LA just passed, I don't know, it was an ordinance or a resolution yesterday on this. So there's a lot going on, but there's so much more that needs to be done. Pretty exciting time in the legislature in that there really hasn't been a lot of environmental action on the coast in the last couple of years, but feels like they're making up for lost time this session, really focusing on plastics issues and sea level rise issues in particular. And so hopefully that helps out some of the people who were asking that question. All right, moving to Justine, coastal resilience. Obviously, Ocean Protection Council, Natural Resources Agency, coastal resilience and climate resilience is one of the top priorities there. You've been working on this an awful lot in a whole bunch of different areas, you know, research, funding projects, communications. You know, we put together sea level rise principles for action about a year ago, and trying to actually make them function in real life. How is that looking to you? I mean, are we making good progress there? What do you really want to highlight from the work that you've been engaged with, and really how are we going to even move much further like we need to with the climate crisis only growing?
That's a lot, big question. Yeah, I really do see progress happening, and I feel like we really are going in the right direction there. For OPC, we have a really critical role in both providing the best available science through our state sea level rise guidance, and these are those projections that I mentioned. They work off of the tide gauges across California, and they give estimated ranges and probabilities for sea level rise at different points in time in the future. And we're committed to updating that every 5 years because the science is really changing rapidly. And the more that science is refined, the more that we can better prepare. And then we have a really large role in convening and in coordinating and in working with different state agencies. Those principles you mentioned, they had 17 departments and agencies within the state. One of the biggest challenges for sea level rise is it's such a cross-cutting issue. I mean, it's roads, it's parks, it's water infrastructure, water supply, it's nature, it's communities, it's homes, it's everything. If you think of a hot button issue, like it's in the mix for sea level rise. So one of the biggest challenges is coordinating and finding solutions that everyone for the different impacts can live with, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're maybe solving one problem, but you're creating a problem elsewhere. So I think as a state, we've come a really long way in coordinating between the state agencies and integrating sea level rise and the consideration of sea level rise into all that work we do. So if you look at a given agency, you'll see that it's there. They're considering sea level rise in everything that they're doing right now, so that we're not in a place where we're investing in things that it wasn't considered, and we're putting ourselves in a bad place in the future. So I think from a planning perspective, we're really making smart decisions as a state right now that's going to position us to be more resilient going forward. And then I think we're working better at the local and the regional level, because another challenge is that, it's a lot playing out at the local level, and these are people's places they're, where they care about. So you have to, they're a huge part of the discussion. And so it's that dynamic between, working with the locality, working with a jurisdiction or a region, but also making sure that as a state, we're preparing. So, in those principles, we have some really ambitious goals of preparing the state, for instance, for 3.5 feet of sea level rise, but it's a flexible approach in that we're planning, and we're precautionary planning, and we want to set up our coast to be able to be resilient to that amount of sea level rise, but it gives the flexibility to wait and see a little bit, to look at that new science and think, well, where do we need to act now? Where do we need to build now? So I think there's just a lot of momentum. It's a huge priority for every agency right now, and the state is putting resources and people behind it, and funding projects, like I mentioned, that are thinking about the future. We're going to invest in this now. We're going to build this now, and this is going to set us up for being in, we're going to be in good shape for this area for decades. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Thanks, Justine. So obviously, more resources for regional and local planning is critical. Obviously for projects, if we're going to really build in resiliency, the resources need to be there to make it happen. It's exciting to see San Francisco Bay and the Coastal Conservancy and all their partners like BCDC and others that and what they're doing in that area from the standpoint of wetland creation and living shorelines and the like, to sort of kind of lead the way statewide moving forward. So that's great. Mike, and this might be the last question, we're running out of time here. MPAs, obviously we're looked at as one of the global leaders on marine conservation because of our marine protected area network. You're talking about, in essence, the network is almost a decade old. A lot of people have been working with the scientific community to actually determine how well has the network worked, and really where can we move from there once we find that out. And so how is the decadal review going, and what do you think, from the standpoint of what we've learned so far? And I know it's a little premature, but really how other areas can sort of learn from what we've done to protect really those special marine areas for generations to come.
Yeah, I think we've achieved something so unique in California in terms of our network. The size of the network, the fact that it protects heavily used coastal habitats, or coastal ecosystems, rather than sort of big, larger MPAs maybe further out at sea. The fact that the design of the network, it was designed by stakeholders, which is really unique, based on sound scientific guidelines, created by a science advisory team, and things like spacing and size, connectivity, habitat representation. So having that, I think, science-based and stakeholder-driven nature is really unique. In terms of how the decadal review is going, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm the most excited about working on. I'm really happy that OPC is supporting the department in these efforts, the department and the commission, because really it's this really important question of how are our NPAs doing, right? And so you mentioned some of the scientific monitoring. We've got almost 10 years of data, more in some cases, certain MPAs like some of our Northern Channel Islands MPAs, long history of monitoring at Point Lobos. For all MPAs, we've got some degree of baseline monitoring, so kind of a snapshot of what these things looked like underwater at the time that they went in, and some degree of long-term monitoring as well in each region. Long-term monitoring started a couple of years ago, and it'll be ongoing through 2022. So we're going to have a really good scientific picture of what difference these areas have made in some of those places that have longer histories of monitoring. Like I've said, Channel Islands, Point Lobos, we're already seeing more and bigger fish. I'm really excited about those results. I'm really excited about our communications efforts to, like I mentioned in my presentation, bring stakeholders into the process and say, okay, 10 years down the road, what does MPA success look like to you? And start to fold those inputs into our evaluation as well. So yeah, and I think in so many ways, what we've achieved here in California can be a global model. We're working with IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, to add our MPA network to their green list of protected areas, which is kind of a counterpart, like the flip side of the red list, right? If the red list is how we're getting it wrong, the green list is how we're getting it right. So really excited about that effort and kind of how we can, continue to learn. The one thing that I think we really need to focus on now moving forward is what's the link between monitoring data and analyses and adaptive management? So what adaptive management options can we consider for the network, and what scientific questions do we need to be asking in order to know which actions we should take?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think it's pretty promising, and the fact that really the entire academic community, it seems like, that works on these sorts of issues has been engaged on California's network. And I know there are many people to sort of thank in that realm, but I think it's just made such a difference on the quality of the assessment, and frankly, the quality of the network itself, and really, really extraordinary work in that regard. So I think we've basically run out of time here. So thank you, Justine and Mike, for letting everybody get to know you a little better, and some of the work that you've been working on, as well as what motivates you each and every day. I also want to thank Lizzie Williamson and Heather Williams and James Pierce and Kimberly Arbuckle for putting together this program, and really the whole Earth Week program. It's been pretty incredible to be part of. And as you can see, if you want to see any of those events, you can go to the website and take a look. And just in closing, I'm known as somebody where the glass it's not even half full; it's pretty empty. It's bone dry. But the reason to still have optimism has to do with the fact that so many incredible people are really working on this issue. We're in a place where resources, the state's in a good economic place, knock on wood. And so, there are some resources to deal with some of these issues. Clearly, we have an NGO community very active on these issues and making sure that they're not getting lost, and really pushing for a lot of the right things moving forward. And the people who work for the state really wanting to make a difference as well right now. And so, we all have our incredible stories about what means the most to us at the coast. I'm somebody who grew up along Santa Monica Bay and never left. And so it's such a huge part of my life and what matters a lot to me. And I think that's just shared by millions and millions of people in California. It's where we all go to beat the heat, to escape the traffic, to really the stress we have each and every day. The ocean is quite rejuvenating in that regard. And that's why we're putting such an incredible effort towards doing what we can to conserve the coast and really make a difference here. And so thank you for attending. And